So I'm a physicist, and I'm going to talk about science, religion, and the quest to understand the infinite mysteries of our existence. And just some of the pictures you can see on the left there, more science-related, such as the very large array in New Mexico, some galaxies, the cell, quarks, muons, mesons, things we'll talk a little bit about, the wave function of hydrogen, and then of course on the right, the human factor, the little prince. You know, we're on this little tiny planet in the middle of nowhere, in the middle of a no-name galaxy. I mean, we call it the Milky Way, but it's just like any other galaxy. And of course, the one singular event of the birth of Jesus Christ, the Holy Trinity, the Ostrog Monastery, and the Hram Svetog Sava in Belgrade. So all of this, as a religious physicist, kind of drives me forward and actually inspires me. And so that's what I want to talk about a little bit today. So the first thing is, why did I get interested in this subject? And I've actually been dealing with these issues for over 20 plus years. When I was at Harvard, I remember a lot of these discussions about science and religion, and were they incompatible? And so, of course, some of you have probably heard of these, some prominent atheists. This is certainly not a complete list. Richard Dawkins. I remember as a little kid, my father had the book The Selfish Gene, and he wrote another one, The God Delusion. And I want to just start my talk off with a quote that he made, which really kind of got me going. I am against religion because it teaches us to be satisfied with not understanding the world. So I'm going to kind of try and end this talk with that quote, okay, on how I disagree with that quote, essentially. And it completely goes against the face of Orthodox Christianity. Stephen Hawking, whom I've met when he was visiting Caltech in Boston, made another quote: "Before we understand science, it is natural to believe that God created the universe. But now science offers a more convincing explanation." What he meant by we would know the mind of God is we would know everything that God would know. If there was a God, which there isn't, I'm an atheist. Okay, so I want to discuss that also, how I disagree with that comment. And then Steven Weinberg, whom I also met when I was at Harvard. He was actually kind of leaving Harvard for University of Texas at Austin. And I also taught his book in our honors class, The First 3 Minutes, which is a very interesting book, and I would recommend that you read it just from the physics point of view. And he was one of the, Stephen Hawking developed the concept of black holes along with Kip Thorne, who's a professor at Caltech. They're best friends. They have this rivalry going on about a case of wine going back and forth across the Atlantic, depending on who's proved right and who's proved wrong. Steven Weinberg was one of the 3 Nobel laureates who unified the electromagnetic and the weak nuclear interaction. And so he made this comment: to me, the conflict between science and religion is more important than these issues of science education or even environmentalism. I think the world needs to wake up from its long nightmare of religious belief, and anything that we scientists can do to weaken the hold of religion should be done, and may in fact be our greatest contribution to civilization. When I saw that quote, I was really depressed about it, and I couldn't believe that a scientist would actually write that. But he is a scientist, bona fide Nobel laureate, so I'm going to kind of discuss that a little bit. And he made another quote in a journal: "The whole history of the last thousands of years has been a history of religious persecutions, wars, pogroms, jihads, crusades. I find it all very regrettable, to say the very least." And then finally, the last thing he says: "The more the universe seems and he says this in his book, by the way, The First 3 Minutes. The more the universe seems comprehensible, the more it also seems pointless." Well, I completely disagree with that, and I'm going to sort of make the case throughout my talk about why. So, often I'll see, even at UNLV and other universities, I'll see this creation versus evolution debate, and I'm going to put that in quotes. And to me, it's a conflict where there should be absolutely no conflict. But, the problem is you have people on both sides just misunderstanding each other. And what do? They get extremists to posit their points of view. And so sure, now it looks like there's this huge debate. And so you can see some articles 10 major court cases about evolution and creationism. And then Stephen Weinberg saying the same thing, even though their arguments did not invoke religion. I think all we know what's behind these arguments. They're trying to protect religious beliefs from contradiction by science. And I want to emphasize that because I'm going to show there is no contradiction, or at least in my point of view. They used to do it by prohibiting teachers from teaching evolution at all. Then they wanted to teach intelligent design as an alternate theory. Now they want to the supposed weaknesses in evolution to be pointed out, like it's the same program. It's all an attempt to let religious ideas determine what is taught in science courses. So that's Stephen Weinberg again. So as you can see, he's got some issues with religion, and I just, again, I'm not a biologist, so I'm not going to specifically focus on the creationism versus evolution, but as a physicist, I've come up with a few of these ideas related to that when I discuss this with people. First of all, from Einstein's relativity, God's time is very different from our own time. Of course, we know God lives forever. Our human bodies will not. But even 7 days on the outskirts of a black hole could be 7 billion years in our time. Okay, time slows down when you get into very strong gravitational fields. So, this idea of 7 days, again, that's it's relative. Okay, time is relative. Secondly, who are we to tell God how to create? God is God. We're here because of God. So we have absolutely no right to impart our ideas of creation and how the world might have been created on God. God is going to do what God does because He's the ultimate free spirit. Our planet needed to be prepared for us. Okay, the early primordial Earth did not have oxygen. It was actually very similar to Venus. It was extremely hot and had a very dense atmosphere, about 93 times the density of our own, and mostly carbon dioxide and sulfuric acid. So it was extremely toxic to life as we know it. So it took time, okay? Time on the scale of creatures producing, synthesizing oxygen via photosynthesis. And so God does everything in His time. Elements, for example, we're all made of elements. So elements like iron, calcium, all of these were synthesized in stars, and the heavier elements, typically heavier than iron, were synthesized in supernovas. So that all takes time, okay, if you're going to do it the way we do it in this universe. The atmosphere had to be changed. Soil had to be built up. Has anybody been to Hawaii? Okay, on the big island, there's one half of it is all rock. The other part is a little nicer because nature had a chance to do its magic there and build up soil. Without soil, you can't plant crops, you can't have food, and of course humans, from the standpoint of many creatures, are kind of helpless. I mean, we don't make our own proteins, we don't photosynthesize, so we are dependent on other life on this planet to exist. And so this all took time, and of course, in the early part, you've all seen the moon, pictures of the moon, it's all got craters, heavily cratered. And so in the early formation of the solar system, there were a lot of objects going all over the place, creating havoc and destruction. And that wouldn't be very good from the standpoint of intelligent life, because we'd always have to be dodging earthquakes and comets and other sort of destructive forces. So the world had to kind of wait until things settled down. We still do get comets, but not at the level that we did, let's say, 2 billion years ago. Okay? And so there's this famous quote that I remember as a kid from Paul Masson Wines. We will sell no wine before it's time. So I kind of look at the earth as you have to wait before intelligent life would be created or evolved, and both, in my opinion. And so so that's a critical thing we need to think about. God created the universe to support life. So from a physics way we would express this, life is an eigenstate of the physical universe. And so I'll talk a little bit more about that. But from a physicist's point of view, we, if anything were just a little bit different from the standpoint of the constants in the universe, the speed of light, the Planck's constant, life as we know it would not exist. The universe would be a dud. And so God set the conditions so that life would be supported in this universe. And then evolution as a theory is not a complete theory. No theory in physics is actually complete. If they talk about a theory of everything, everything is really an approximation. If you look at Newtonian mechanics, for example, F equals ma, force and acceleration, when you go into the relativistic regime, it's actually quite different. It doesn't mean that it's completely wrong. It's just that Newtonian mechanics works well in the realm of low speeds, where you're not going near the speed of light. So physics is that way. We're always modifying our theories. It's not that they're completely wrong. It's just that for different conditions, like extreme conditions or whatever, you come up with a different theory. So evolution, only now are we beginning to see, we're literally scratching the surface about the amazing complexity of living systems. And this is some stuff you probably may have heard of in the news: jumping genes, repressor proteins, the quaternary structure of proteins, messenger RNA, DNA, gene insertion, viruses. All of these are techniques that that actually can change the phenotype, the genotype of organisms. And so there are many yet to be understood mechanisms associated with alternating the genotype, or basically the DNA of organisms, beyond sheer chance and natural selection. And my final word on this is courses in science should be separated from courses in religion. I'm not saying that we shouldn't have science and religion courses in a joint sense, but if you're going to teach a course on science, then you teach scientific theory. If you're going to teach a course on creationism, that's religion, then teach it as a religious course. So let me just demystify science a little bit. First of all, I always tell my students, you're all doing science or physics. I'm a little biased because I'm a physicist, and physics is the root of science. You're always doing physics every moment of your existence, whether you're aware of it or not. I'm using my sound box to vibrate a band, in a sense, my vocal cord, and that produces sound waves. And those sound waves oscillate out in the room and propagate, and then you're using your auditory detectors, otherwise known as ears, which vibrate as a consequence of the sound waves, and then convert it into electrical energy. So that's all physics. Whether you're driving a car and you understand the concepts of friction, or using your cell phone and understanding the idea of wireless fields, that's all physics. So physics or science is really about nature. It's the natural physical world that we interact with our five senses. So science seeks to observe the world around us. It's empirical. It's data-driven. You measure with the five senses: sight, touch, smell, sound, taste, and for the lucky ones, 6. Okay, and draw conclusions, make hypotheses, explanations about the principles and phenomena that govern our existence in this physical world. Physics is the foundation of science, and it seeks to explain the universe as a continual exchange/conversion of energy and matter and potential energy, which is potential energy, since the dawn of time. So in other words, the way physicists view the universe currently, it's not necessarily it's written in stone, it's just we believe that there may have been some sort of a quasi-singularity of space and time, and that was all energy, and then the explosion occurred, and then as a consequence, everything that's been going on 13.5 billion years thus has basically been a conversion of one form of energy into another. So again, if you eat some food, your body takes the chemical potential stored energy, then converts it into ATP, so you can move your muscles, so you have an electrical energy in your brain. That's all how physicists view the world. It's all conversion of energy from one form or the other. And it is believed that the physical universe is governed by 4 fundamental interactions. Gravity, we all know gravity, right? That's what pulls us down onto the earth. Electromagnetism, that's actually the most important force. That's what holds all of us together. That's the forces responsible for molecules, atoms, etc. And then you have the weak nuclear, that's related to fission, as you might know in nuclear power plants. And then the strong nuclear force, which is what we call the gluons, is a mediating particle that hold together, through quarks, hold together protons and neutrons. For thousands of years of study, humans have come a long way toward understanding their environment. But from my perspective, and many other physicists, we've merely scratched the surface of the complexity in the natural physical world. So on the left picture, you have what might have been an artist's rendition of the Big Bang, let there be light. In the second diagram, that's a Feynman diagram. So Richard Feynman, who was a professor of mine at Caltech, this is something related to electrodynamics. You see a photon, that little squiggly thing in the middle, and then you have a scattering event between electrons. Then you have the strong force holding together nuclei, and you can see electromagnetic. That's that classic picture of electrons going in circles. And then on the right, that's the strong nuclear force with quarks. We'll talk more about that shortly. Quarks are believed to, you all know about protons and neutrons? Those are the constituents of nuclei. Okay? Nuclei are the center of the atom, so they're balanced by electrons, and then all of us are because of those atoms. And you all know that the atoms are mostly empty space. So all of that we see is really mostly an illusion. It's like empty space, essentially. And and again, I'm not a theologian, so I'm not going to pretend to be, but I found this in Wikipedia. What is religion? So please don't. I'm just.
Is that a credible source?
It's a template for discussion. That's all. It's not an end-all, be-all. But a religion is an organized collection of beliefs, cultural systems, and worldviews that relate humanity to an order of existence. Many religions have narratives, symbols, sacred histories that aim to explain the meaning of life, the origin of life, and the universe. From their beliefs about the cosmos, human nature, people may derive morality, ethics, religious laws, or preferred lifestyle. So from my perspective, religion seeks to explain our reasons for being. That's something that transcends biology. I can't, as far as we know, other creatures are not asking why are we here. But we ask this. All human civilization have developed complex religions to explain why we are here. So there's that tabula rasa about us, that we come from nothing, or we think we do, and then we're trying to find out why are we here? What is our purpose? And what is this? So, but it establishes a mode of conduct, moral conduct. For example, the Ten Commandments, that does not necessarily derive from the natural world. Anybody know about John Stuart Mill's utilitarianism? Okay, so utilitarianism, which is supposed to be logical, philosophical, says that it's all about maximizing happiness. So if there's a room of people that are happy if they get rid of somebody, it doesn't matter to get rid of that person because everybody else is happier. So the net happiness of the room is greater if they get rid of that person. Well, that's not Christianity. Okay, so in other words, one could argue from a biological perspective, logical perspective, that John Stuart Mill's utilitarianism works well. But from a Christian perspective, it's ridiculous. Every single life is worth something, okay, because it's created by God. So this idea of love thine enemy, just doesn't make sense from a logical perspective. But it derives from religion, from our Christian faith. And it came directly from the Creator, okay, the Ten Commandments, for example, who exists both inside and outside our world. Finally, what is mathematics? These are all things we're going to be talking about. Mathematics is a logical framework that attempts to express reality in terms of variables. For example, x, y, z, and t, that can be manipulated to make predictions and calculations. However, in our universe, which is governed by something called the uncertainty principle, mathematics is actually only an approximation to reality. And that's something that theoretical physicists, and I don't know if there's any here, but they may have, sometimes they disagree with that. They think there is a theory of everything. But from an experimentalist point of view, I can tell you anything the uncertainty principle essentially says if you have a particle and you want to measure the position of that particle and the momentum simultaneously, you can't do it. Okay, there's no such thing as exactness. If I asked to machine a piece of metal that is 1 inch in let's say length, what do you mean by 1 inch? Is it 1.0 inches, which means 1.0 plus or minus 0.1? Is it 1.00 inches? 1.000000? It's like a Zeno's paradox. You can never get to a point in this universe because there's something, what I call with my students, schmear. There's a schmear associated with everything in reality. So that's a deep question. Are there hidden variables, and actually that make exact calculations as we know them impossible? And I tend to actually believe that there are some hidden variables. I'll talk about that. Okay. My dad loves to say this statement, and I agree with him. Logic is necessary, but not necessarily sufficient. You know what I mean? Okay? Yes. I mean, as one who does experiments a lot, I can come up with the most logical plan for my experiment, but I cannot plan for serendipity. And you know why? Because there's too many variables. Okay? When you can predict something, that means the idea is you have all the variables known. But there are just too many variables. And that's where humans get into a fallacy, an arrogance of their abilities to predict, because they don't know all the variables. So, I'm in good company. These are some religious physicists. Isaac Newton, he's one of my heroes. Nikola Tesla, definitely my hero. I gave a talk on him last year here. Charles Towns. You may not have known Charles Towns. Anybody know who Charles Towns was? No. He's the inventor of the laser. You know the laser that you see all over the place? It started with the maser, the microwave amplification via stimulated emission of radiation. And then it became the laser, light amplification. He won the Nobel Prize, and I didn't realize, I saw it in his obituary, he won the Templeton Prize. So the Templeton Prize is a prize that was set up for scientists and religion trying to encourage dialogue. And so he actually was very devout. And I had no idea until I read about this. There was another physicist, I'm sorry, his name is a little bit sketchy there, William Grosvenor Pollard. And he was actually a physicist on the lower left there. And he was a physicist and a Episcopalian minister. And he did a lot of work with nuclear physics, and he actually wrote this book, Physicist and Christian, which I've never read, but I found out about it just preparing for this talk. So guess what? I'm going to go find that book, and I'm going to read it. And Einstein is a little more controversial. He did believe in God, but as I understand it, later near the end of life, he sort of repudiated that view. But he did make this nice quote, which I thought was really nice. And his wife, of course, was Mileva Madic, who was Serbian. And he said, scientists were rated as great heretics by the church. Now, I have to ask which church, but okay, we won't go there. But it's certainly not the Orthodox Church, but they were truly religious men because of their faith in the orderliness of the universe. That's a very powerful statement. The orderliness of the universe, the faith in the orderliness of the universe. So physics, in a sense, begins. And this is what people don't like to talk about when they talk about science. It actually begins with an act of faith that the physics that we learn on this planet Earth is exactly the same physics that's going on in Alpha Centauri, our nearest star, or the Crab Nebula, or other portions of the universe. Have we ever been to the Alpha Centauri? Mm-hmm. No. We've just been to the bottom. Now we're on the outskirts of the solar system. So that's an act of faith. You understand what I'm saying? We don't even know if the physics that we have developed, that we have discovered, observed in this world, actually connects to all the physics going on in the rest of the universe. That's faith. But you talk to any physicist, and they'll say, well, of course, it's got to be, Well, but it starts from faith. Faith means something that you believe in that you don't have proof for. So, in fact, science, in a sense, starts from this idea of faith that our planet is governed by these same principles as the neighboring star, neighboring galaxies, neighboring clusters of galaxies. We've never actually proven this. We have only 5 senses with which to observe the world. One of the things I just wanted to comment in the lower left corner, and again, you don't have to know math for this talk, but I think it looks cool. So if you don't mind, I'll have a few equations here and there. But that's the equation for the gravitational field. Okay? Now, did you know that Isaac Newton was called the heretic? Because they said, and he was deeply religious, but he comes up with this theory of gravitation. And they said, well, wait a minute, but we can't see the gravitational field, so you're a heretic, because we don't understand what you're talking about. And yet here he's one of the more religious physicists that probably ever existed. So that's the whole point. We don't see everything. We only have 5 senses, and for the lucky ones, maybe 6. On the right figure, that's the sun and the earth, and there are these complex reactions, nuclear reactions going on. And there's a little mu particles on top of the not to scale. Those are called neutrinos. Neutrinos are neutral. They were predicted by Enrico Fermi. And I'll bet you, any of you know that 10,000 neutrinos are passing through us every second? Each and every one of you, 10,000 neutrinos. You don't know it because they don't interact very strongly with us. They interact via that weak nuclear interaction. So we don't know that they're passing through us. So the point I'm trying to make is there are lots of things we can't see, like gravity, like neutrinos, but that doesn't mean that they're not there. Okay? So this is God can be both outside and inside His creation. So and I'm not, and please forgive me, I'm not a theologian. I'm not saying I know what God does or what He is, but learning His world gives me a little more inspiration about what might be. And so the beauty of God, in my opinion, is He can be inside and outside creation. What's creation? Well, for us, it's our universe. That doesn't mean there's not other universes. Okay, and even physicists and atheists talk about the possibility of other universes. Why should there only be one? Right? I mean, if there's one, why not two? If there's two, why not 20? Okay, so it's this idea that we get into this concept of infinity I'm going to talk about, that you get into this logical idea that, well, there could be so much more going on than we'll ever know. So I liken this to, you see that car, the Tesla, okay, the Tesla car, after my hero. And I think of it, that God is like the creator of something like a Tesla car. I mean, much more beautiful, of course. But the point is that I may not know God, but if I study that car, or the creator of that car, then I can learn something a little bit about, get inspired about what that creator might be because of His creation. Okay? So as a physicist, I look at the universe in all of its glory and beauty from physical principles, and I say, wow, what an amazing thing to come together. And there is, in my mind, no question that it was planned. There was a calculated effort. There was God that did this. And God, like a painter, is painting His world, and we're trying to find Him. We're trying to find that creator. And of course, I love Van Gogh. That's the Starry, Starry Night. And I think about that a lot when I think about God. So in physics, I'm going to just talk about a few ideas in physics that are extremely important to sort of advance my ideas. And there's a quote on the bottom from Nikola Tesla, and this is kind of where I probably should have put that at the top. It says, if you want to find the secrets of the universe, think in terms of energy, frequency, and vibration. So this is Tesla in the 19th century, when things were just starting to come about with quantum mechanics and Maxwell's electromagnetism, and that's what it says right there. To me, that is the essence. So everything can be actually in our universe can be likened to a wave, whether it's earthquakes, water waves. It's something that oscillates. It's got a wavelength. It's got an amplitude, and it's in some sort of what we call a restorative medium. One might even talk about waves of the climate, as the climate is going into these extreme oscillations of heat, cold, water, drought, and so there's a wave-like type of behavior. So, as I said, sound is a wave. Waves are energy. They're forms of energy. Light is, of course, an energy. It's what we call photons, little wave packets. And the whole electromagnetic spectrum on the lower left there is energy as well. That's where you're talking about microwaves, radio waves, gamma rays, X-rays, far infrared, visible light. All that is oscillating and electromagnetic vibrations. Okay? And so waves are extremely important in terms of physics. And there's also a concept called the wave-particle duality. Okay? And so even particles like electrons or nuclei have a wave property to them. We call it a de Broglie wavelength. And so in the lower center figure, you see a particle M moving to the right with a speed v, and you see this weird oscillating bump. And so physicists have this dilemma. We call it the particle-wave duality, or paradox. They also call it a paradox, that basically you can look at a particle as like a ball, and moving with the speed v, with the mass m, or you can look at it as this oscillating little wave front. So like a wave burst, tone burst, boop, and then it goes. Okay, it passes. And so that's a very important concept in physics. And another thing to talk about is if any one of the fundamental constants associated with our universe were altered by a fraction of a percent, and I think Richard Feynman even said this, the universe would likely be a dud. And what I mean by the dud, like a firecracker that just never really kind of got going. You know, it just foots out. So basically, there's this fine structure constant in the right. It says alpha equals e squared over 2 epsilon naught hc. Those are fundamental constants. E is the charge of the electron. Epsilon naught relates to the permeability constant of free space. H is called Planck's constant, which is the essence of quantum mechanics. And c is the speed of light. And it's roughly 1 over 137. So the point is that if any one of those constants were just slightly changed, we wouldn't have life, we wouldn't have this universe. Now, atheists would argue, well, that just means that in the infinity of possibilities of these different constants, we happen to be the success, and so that's why we're here. Okay, I could see that. But there's also something called Occam's razor. And what you find is when atheists talk about reasons for our existence, you know, just sheer probability, you actually have to make more assumptions than you do with an assumption that there is an intelligent entity that created driving the universe. After all, we have some sort of level of intelligence. Where did that come from? From nothing? So atheists want to pretend that they're like gods, that they're the masters of space and time, and make all these assumptions by chance, that we're just here by chance, and all these concepts that just happen to be right to make life as we know it just happen to be as it is. There's no other explanation. So again, it's not that they're necessarily wrong. I can't disprove them, but they can't disprove me as a believer in God. Okay, so that's my point. So there's another issue related to, now I talked about the particles, I talked about the wave-particle duality, and quantum wave functions. Okay, so it's a theory, and again, I'm not saying I know God. I can't even pretend God is inside and outside, but by thinking about these things, I've come up with some pretty inspirational ideas that might, who knows, maybe there's something on the right track or not. So, there's anybody hear about the Schrodinger's cat paradox? Yes. Okay, cool. All right, now we're somewhere here, okay? So, the Schrodinger's cat, the idea is you have this cat that's in a safe, and there's a vial of poison. And if the cat knocks over the poison, the cat dies. And you don't know if the cat is alive or dead until you open the safe and you, what we say, collapse the wave function. So the cat exists in this strange state, kind of half dead, half alive, and you just don't know until you break the wave function. So many things in human existence, like we love sound, we love music and worlds. So to me, there are some sort of, yes, there are hidden variables. We just don't see them as far as what drives this universe. So again, this relates to this particle-wave duality, which is a paradox. Basically, it says you can either do an experiment looking for a particle as as like a ball, or you can do an experiment as a wave. And we can't resolve, it depends on your experiment. They're equal interpretations of the same thing. So if they're equal interpretations of the same thing, well, gee, that tells me that we don't fully understand that thing. They're two dimensions, sort of dimensions of some similar reality. And like I said, you see there a rock. I mean, everything can be looked at as particles in the upper right, where you have something hitting, like light particles hitting a mirror, or waves, where you see the wave fronts, like in a water wave hitting a mirror. And they're equivalent interpretations. It's a paradox. They're completely the same thing. There's nothing wrong with one or the other, which to me just says there's something a little deeper involved. And then one of the things I want to talk about is four-dimensional space-time. So I'm going to mention 4 dimensions because we live in space. That's z, x, y. Okay, so we have three directions, and that's your cube. But then we also have time, and Einstein showed that time is in a way, a direction of space. And curved space-time, which you can see on the left, the way Einstein viewed it, is the gravitational field actually curves space-time, which is a little bit strange because on the one hand, he said there's no medium in space-time, and yet here we see it can be curved. His argument was that it was just the gravitational field causing the curvature. And then you can see on the right an example of how if you were going from point A to point B along that purple sheath, it would be a long distance, wouldn't it? But if you could cut through the wormhole from A to B, that's a much shorter distance. So physicists think about these ideas a lot because there's dreams of space travel, time travel, you name it. But now, so those are kind of some of the foundations of the physics that I've given you. I also have to discuss the idea of quarks. And so Murray Gell-Mann, who was a professor at Caltech as well, didn't like students, always taught the hardest possible course and admitted that so that no undergraduate could ever take it. He came up with the idea of the quark, and he got the Nobel Prize for it, and it's believed that there are these three particles. So there's different types of quark. There's charmed quark, top quark, colored bottom quark, top quark, the up, down. So U would represent the up, and D would represent down, and that these three quarks are in this sort of what we call a hadron bag. So they form, let's say, a proton or a neutron. And so the bizarre thing about, and this is where this strong nuclear force comes in, they're mediated by these particles we call gluons. And the bizarre thing about the quarks is they're fractionally charged. So you can't really separate them. If you separate them, it's like a spring that gets harder and harder to stretch. And so, and of course, this is believed to be one of the fundamental particles of matter. So on the right, you can see the scales. The atom is of the order of an angstrom, that's 10 to the minus 10 meters, or 1 divided by 10 with 1 with 10 zeros. The nucleus is a Fermi, so that's 10 to the minus 15 meters. The nucleon is even smaller, and then you have these quarks. And you can see in the lower right picture, there's different ways you can make these particles. The proton on the left, the neutron on the second one, the pions, all these different fundamental particles, okay? You don't have to understand this, by the way. I mean, I like the pictures. But this got me really thinking when I was thinking about wave-particle duality. And there's a statement from the Nicene Creed that really is very powerful. In one Lord Jesus Christ, the Son of God, the only begotten of the Father, before all ages, light of light, true God of true God, begotten, not made. Begotten, not made. So he's always been here, just is here, not made, being of one essence with the Father, by whom all things were made. I just love that statement. So this is, again, I'm not saying it's correct, it's just a way of thinking that might give us a little more insight. So the Holy Trinity, which is the bedrock, I would say, of our Christian faith, the Father is outside and inside our four-dimensional space-time universe. The Son is the particle form of God inside the universe, and the Holy Ghost is this spiritual wave that is inside our universe. So a physicist might say, as I said, God can split his wave function. There's God's wave function plus the Son of God plus the Holy Spirit, and that's the Holy Trinity. These entities of God are, now listen to this, inseparable and indivisible, just like quarks. It would seem logical, would it not, that the imprint of the Creator on our universe would be found in the particle foundations of our universe. Perhaps. Okay? So, the forces between the three, the Holy Spirit, the Holy Ghost, and God the Father, the Holy Ghost, Jesus Christ, and God the Father, make them nearly inseparable as it is with quarks. And I had this one deacon, we were chatting about this, and he had a really cool way to look at it. He was fascinated by this idea. And he said, so when Jesus resurrected, or actually when he went into Hades, and he's like, can you imagine what force it must have been to pull all those dead souls, those poor souls, out based on this idea that they're sort of inseparable, okay? In other words, to separate them, you have to exert incredible force. And that's maybe what happened. That's so related to this idea, are there only 4 dimensions? Okay, in other words, is there only space and time? And there's this quote from the Bible: "Then God said, 'Let there be light,' and there was light. God saw that the light was good, and God separated the light from the darkness." That's a very important concept, even with physics. So even before physicists were really around, you can see some of the foundations of this idea of the Big Bang were kind of there. And so I want you to think about the universe as blowing up a balloon. And so if you think of blowing up the balloon, there's a deep question that we would like to ask is, what is it being blown up into? If I blow up a balloon in this room, we know there's a room here, right? So if I have this big bang, this big firecracker, boom, kaboom, give all this energy, what is it expanding into? That's a deep question for me. So to me, it would be natural to say we have 4 dimensions, but there's something outside of that 4 dimensions. God's playground, God's infinite of infinity, okay, so to speak. And that's how I see this when I think about God being inside and outside of this world. Okay? So has anybody ever heard of the book Flatland? Yes. Okay, it's a very easy read. It's 100 or so pages. It was written by Edwin Abbott, and I believe he was a mathematician, as I recall. And so in this story of Flatland, and it was really a satire, satirical from the 19th century, he goes and he discusses this, there's this, I think it's a square, and he's a teacher in a 2-dimensional world. And so, I mean, you can't, well, he did make this up, but the point is, so he has this idea that there's a 3rd dimension. That what if there was a 3rd dimension? And so he gets persecuted for that 3rd dimension idea. He tells some people about it, and it's too, the elites of that world, that 2-dimensional world, decide this is too controversial. This is going to get people free. This is going to free them, and they're going to rebel. And so they put him in prison. And while he's in prison, there's this sphere on the lower left there, and this 3-dimensional sphere visits him in his, I'm sorry, in his 2-dimensional prison. So as you can imagine, the Flatland example is showing the upper left. There's this ball coming down, and here's the 2-dimensional slice that this square lives in. And so as the sphere goes in through the 2-dimensional world, he sees this circle that expands and then decreases and then disappears. And he can't grasp his mind. Like if a 4-dimensional creature, a spatial 4-dimensional creature were to visit us, imagine what that would be. A tesseract, a cube inside of a cube. How would we visualize that? It would be very challenging. Okay? So that's an important thing because it occurred to me that, well, you know, the apostles had said that after Jesus was resurrected, he could walk through walls. And of course, you'll have atheists saying, oh, you believe in Santa Claus, you know, people walking through walls, all these miracles. You know, I mean, it's amazing. You know, I mean, yes, it's a matter of faith, either you believe the miracles or not. But boy, I don't know that there was ever anybody that had so many miracles ascribed to him than Jesus. So could Jesus walk through walls? Absolutely. Maybe not as a human, but as something different, yes. As something energy. I mean, energy goes through walls, right? Can you do tricks? Could you build wormholes? Could you go into a higher dimension and come back down? Of course you can. Of course, if you have that ability. We don't have that ability except in our imagination. Okay, so that's an important idea. So Flatland, to me, is something, you know, is a perfect example. And somebody even wrote, there's a link down below, is it about the nature of Jesus Christ's resurrected body, and they actually specifically described Flatland, and this is a possibility of how Jesus could be able to walk through walls. So, again, am I a crazy physicist, pseudo, whatever, or is there some merit to what I'm saying? Well, many physicists believe in something called string theory. Okay, I think it's even more beautiful than that, but the idea that the universe is comprised of these tiny, tiny little strings, and the strings vibrate, because remember what Nikola Tesla said, it's all about vibration and energy and frequency. So here you have techniques that, I mean, there's predictions of 12 dimensions. Okay, so I'm not totally crazy that there might be other dimensions. The only issue is that the problem with string theory is we can't make measurements with it because the energies you need are 1,000 times greater than the energies available at the Large Hadron Collider in Switzerland. Okay, so someday will we, if we don't destroy ourselves, will we get there? Perhaps, yes. Okay, but not right now. So right now, string theory, even in the words of Marie Gell-Mann, is something that's beautiful, it's something that's mathematical, and it should be studied regardless if it has anything to do with reality. Okay, so yes, there are many aspects of reality that we're, and it says, according to string theory, what appears to be empty space is actually tumultuous, I would say, smear of energy, of strings vibrating at the precise frequencies, and then this creates your dimensions of space and time. So this kind of gets me into this idea I had about what the soul might be. I do believe very strongly in the soul. And on the upper left, does anybody know about the different infinities, Aleph Nun, Aleph 1, Aleph 2? Okay, it's complex math, but it turns out that there's, you know what infinity is, right? It's just a number that goes on without end. 1, 2, 3, 4. Well, there's different types of infinities. There's infinities of integers, there's infinities of irrational numbers, of rational numbers. And so I like to say the mind is the playground of the infinities. Why? Because we have the ability to imagine planets, life, and universes far beyond our own. And this is a gift that transcends not only biology, but transcends our four-dimensional space-time. So in the left figure, this is some artist's rendition of different universes going off all at different times, connected by these little wormholes. So can we, in our soul, can we possibly traverse these different wormholes and go into different universes and see different living things? I believe that. And so, in fact, what I believe about the soul is that we have our four-dimensional component of our space-time body, and then there's this infinite or at least higher dimensional component, which I call the soul, which is pure energy, and it's some sort of a quantum wave function. And so it's able to transcend, and that's why when you dream, you don't really have full control in your dreams, and oftentimes you don't remember them because I think maybe that quantum component is drifting somewhere else. I really don't know. But I definitely believe that that's the part that remains with you, is your soul. And so I had this beautiful vision of fireflies, and we are little pieces of quantum creative energy, and then God, the Father, this infinite light, and we're sort of flying around that infinite light. And that picture in the lower middle there is kind of just summarizes the way I see it as far as that. So based on this idea that the soul has a component that transcends four-dimensional space-time, and that's the component that leaves your body, one could make the argument that worship the golden calf materialism, so prevalent in modern society, is an effort by some to get us to focus only on the physical four-dimensional world and forget the critical component of our soul that transcends this world, which is of infinite or at least higher dimensions. Again, why am I making the case of higher dimensions? Because we can imagine higher dimensions. How can you imagine? It just doesn't make sense to me that you could imagine a higher dimension, have the kind of mathematics that we have, and it be biologically based. I mean, there's something deeper than just simple particles, if you know what I mean. That's how I see that. So just some kind of parting thoughts. I tell my students this, don't be limited by your intelligence. Okay? That's some thing about think outside of the box. And what I mean by box is the four-dimensional universe box. And then I want to answer that question, that issue that I brought up in the beginning, that religion is against knowledge. It's not against knowledge. Not true Christianity. Why is God? What was the issue with Adam and Eve? The issue was that they weren't ready for the knowledge. God gave them an instruction, and He was trying to test: are they obedient? Are they going to listen to Him? If you're God and you're making this infinite world of beauty and symmetry and based on these amazing principles, you don't want people messing it up. You don't want these other entities. You want to make sure they're going to go along. And so the idea of knowledge is that with knowledge comes responsibility. And the problem with human beings is that we get this knowledge and then we use it against people. Okay, we use it to hurt God's creation, not to glorify God, not to further his creation. And that's the issue, is not the knowledge itself, it's how do we use that knowledge. And so as a physicist, I'm excited. And in fact, I have a colleague, when I go to do experiments at the Advanced Photon Source, our country's brightest X-ray source. And when we get together, we often pray. And I can't tell you of a more beautiful feeling, being surrounded by energy, by this accelerator, this massive accelerator, by my experiment, and feeling the love, feeling God, the Holy Spirit with us. Because that's what inspires me, to continue seeking and searching in that infinite quest for knowledge. And love is actually the most important force in God's world. Okay? So I have this memory when I was a little kid, a little baby. I was probably just a year old, or I don't know, maybe 15 months old. My mom and dad took me to Florida. And I remember my mom dropping me in the ocean. And I was terrified. I remember crying and being so scared. And it was like that kind of a scene. There was the sun was sitting on the ocean. And I think about what Isaac Newton said here, which I think is a very beautiful quote. I was like a boy playing on the seashore and diverting myself now and then, finding it a smoother petal or prettier shell than the ordinary, whilst the great ocean of truth lay undiscovered before me. You can't say something like that and not be incredibly have faith and believe in God. Because to understand, to be like Isaac Newton, despite all of that not knowing anything, and continue to seek, that's what I think God wants us to do. And so I have this picture in my office, this tree. And I think of the universe, I think of God's universes, I think of the infinity, of just like this growing tree, that we just keep going forward and advancing our understanding. Obviously, we'll never catch up to God. God's been doing this forever. We are not God. We think we might be little gods, but we're not the masters of space and time. We can't bend it the way we want to. But there's something, I believe, of God that is with us. I mean, they do say God-like, as Father said earlier today. And I think part of that God-like quality is an innocence of just loving to explore, just loving to learn. Not for the sake because I want to get a Nobel Prize or because I want to destroy the city, but just to learn, just to be on the seashore and look at those pebbles and be amazed at what God did. So I've been writing on this for some years, and I'm actually hoping someday to write a book on this. You're my first audience I've ever given this kind of a talk to. So I want to thank you for the patience. I'm really excited about this topic, and I'd like to thank Father Blaschko for inviting me to give this, and for all of you parishioners for your extreme interest and attention. And this talk is dedicated to my sister Christina Mira Pravica, and out of the hundreds, if not thousands, of talks and lectures that I've given over the past few decades, this is the one talk she really, really, really wanted to be here for. And you know what? She is. Yes. She is. Okay. I know that.
Thank you, Michael, very much. And we thank Christina too, because she was the one when Professor Michael gave a lecture about Nikola Tesla, and we talked about another lecture, and Christina said, Father, ask him to talk about the connection between science and religion.
Yes,
and most of you know that Christina reposed in the Lord a month ago, not even a month ago, and so this is in her memory, and she was a dear person, and say a prayer for her. We did a prayer today in the church, and please continue to pray for her. She was a person whose death was really a testimony to a true Christian death, I mean, against all the odds and laws of physics and medicine, and she died with a smile, and I know only two people. There was an elder on Mount Theotokos who died with a smile, and then Christina. She was the only one that, after him, so, because she was a blessed soul. And on Good Friday, one of the persons from St. Sava, who occasionally comes here, Christina told her, she said, this is my last Easter with you. And this lady, Lidiana, she said, well, don't say that, you know, God is able to do miracles and believe that in a miracle. She said, and Christina said, yes, he already did a miracle for me. He showed me where I'm going to be. And she said, I was crying and she was smiling and she was joyful. And I said, you know, that's blessed that, you know, so. Thank you, and we want to open this for discussion and, you know, for questions. I know you have lots of questions, so please, this is the opportunity to ask questions now. Yes.
You can go the whole limit. Yeah. Right. I think it's infinity. That's my personal opinion. Because again, here's my argument with the infinite dimensions. If there's 4 dimensions, why can't there be 5? And as I said, physicists have predicted, in some cases, 12 dimensions for string theory. So if there's 12 dimensions, why can't there be 13? And then you get into this logical paradigm, you say, well, then there's really infinite. So to me, God is the ultimate free spirit. And why people want us to focus on this space-time world is that that's what God gave us, the freedom, is that infinite dimensional ability to create, imagine. I mean, limited creation, of course. We're not the masters of space-time, but the point is that it's that ability to transcend, to get out of that two-dimensional prison, and that's what the elites who want us to subjugate us. You could put me in prison, you could do whatever you want. I will always love God. God is my freedom. That comes from only God, and nobody's going to take that away. And so that, from a physics point of view, that's why I get into this idea of infinite dimensions, because if we can imagine infinity, I know we're not, that's a limited imagination, but if we can think about infinity, why can't it be there? It just seems to me that there would be something preventing it, and that's why I think there's infinity. So yeah, I think there may be. Did anybody ever read this book? It was called Proof of Heaven. Okay, you should read it. It was written by a doctor, a medical doctor. I think he was a Harvard graduate as well, and he had this out-of-body, he almost died, and from a disease, or his brain, like encephalitis or something, and he claims he went to heaven. And you know what? Everything he said in that book made sense to me. There is this, there was on YouTube, there was somebody who had an a nearly death, like they drowned, almost died experience, and he said he went into this, like a judgment place. He said there was this hole, like a black hole, and it was so dark, and it was so empty, that I didn't even want Hitler to go into that hole. And you know how they say God, when you're with God, that's the whole idea. Are we with God or are we against God? Can we accept that infinite light or not? When I see that black hole, I think of, and it's even more empty than you can believe, because it's infinitely empty. And I think maybe that's what happens when you get away from God. You just go into nothingness. And that's kind of scary. And so that's where I have this idea of this, higher dimensions or infinite dimensions from that standpoint.
Mike, is there anything, I was thinking about this recently, how can the immortality of our soul have a beginning? Yeah. That's
a very good question. And I'm struggling with that myself. This is not a finished work, by the way. Okay, it's not even close, and I suspect I'll be working on this till the day I die. But
what's the question?
It is the soul. How could the soul, if it's infinite, how could it come from, start, have a beginning? In other words, so this idea of beginning and an end. Obviously, some religions have these ideas of reincarnations, and I'll be honest with you, I wouldn't want to be reincarnated. I wouldn't want to go through what I've been through, losing my sister, my brother, you know what I mean? So, don't forget, and again, this is something I've learned myself, we're not God. God has been around forever. We will never compete with an entity that's been around forever. Never. Yeah. Don't even think about it. Yeah. Okay? Either you love that entity or you're going to have to go away. Okay? Yeah. So, the point is that, but God created us. He created the angels. So if I look at it that way, then I would say, well, they did have a start. He was their start. Yeah. And so, yes, and I didn't even understand this as a physicist, the idea of abortion and how sinful it was, but I do now, based on this quantum wave. You started something with conception, and now you killed it.
Yeah.
That is murder, in a sense, because that is a soul.
Yeah.
And so, you know what I mean? It's not PC to talk about, and I have to always, I have lots of questions as a physics professor with my students about life, the universe, and everything. It's just, it's par for the course, I guess, for my field, but I have to be careful how I step on that, because, I don't want to, I'm a scientist, I'm religious, but I can't impart my religious doctrine on the physics I teach. Physics is physics. I mean, either you understand it or you don't. You can solve problems or not.
Yeah.
The religion is different. But yeah, I think that's where the beginning, I think there is a beginning, and it's conception. Now how can something that comes from a beginning have an infinite end? Oh, we have rays. Rays start at a point, and they go on forever. Okay.
Yeah.
Lines obviously, go both ways. But we do have rays, and like a ray of light. Yeah. And so we're that little firefly, that quantum soul that God got going. He started that fire.
How do we know in our infinite being?
Well, that's my point, is that I think the soul has a component rooted in infinity. And what does that mean? It means that we can transcend. Like I used to be obsessed, I'd think about, well, if you're a soul, if you travel at the speed of light, time stops from a relativistic point of view. But if I'm looking, let's say my sister wanted to go to Alpha Centauri, for example, for whatever reason, then she'd have to take 4.5 years to get over there. For her, there would be no time, but for us, I'd have to watch this soul, which I can't watch, but do you know what I mean? I'm just work with me.
Yeah.
Okay, but then I realized, you know what? I'm thinking this too hard. I'm overthinking this because I'm too rooted in the physics ideas of four-dimensional space-time.
Yeah.
If you think outside of the box, physics works beautifully. The physics I know inside our universe. I don't know what works outside of the universe. I know something works, but it's probably not this.
Yeah.
And so if you can go through wormholes and you can do this entanglement issue, and I think we're all connected. I think all of our wave functions in some way. I mean, you're most connected to the people you love, to the people, your siblings. But I think that even the fact that we're having this discussion, we're connecting. And I think in some sense that has something with that's a resonance in the soul. I think it's really cool.
How do you think about quantum jumping?
Okay, so you mean like tunneling?
Yeah.
Yes, okay. Absolutely. Quantum tunneling is basically, remember how I said that waves, like energy can, you could take, like when you go to the, at the TSA and the airport and they do far IR, you do this scan, they can see inside you, they can penetrate, maybe you better not, you probably don't want to know that, but they can go through your clothes, X-rays penetrate. So quantum tunneling is just basically this idea that particles are waves, and the waves have a component that can actually escape a barrier and go literally tunnel. Instead of going over the hill, it can tunnel right through. So absolutely. I think that when Jesus resurrected, I think his flesh was a little bit different. I think it might have been the flesh that Adam and Eve had. You know what I mean? Something, I can't make a measurement on it because it's not there, but that doesn't mean it's not there. It just means my senses are not tuned to that particular particle, that particular energy form.
Well, you could see that in the Star Trek, how they do this.
Amazing,
right there, you made a point.
Yeah.
Everything is recycled, right?
Yeah.
The stars are born,
Yes.
then they die,
Yes.
and so we are practically made of old material.
We're made of stardust.
Exactly.
Yes, we are. We really are. No, it's true. We really are made of stardust.
And that's what connects us. And
I think it is.
The connection.
Yeah, all of our particles have been produced in extreme conditions, and I think it's a beautiful thing. And in this universe, energy is conserved. I can't answer that question. Religion is metaphysics. It's outside of physics, outside of this universe. And so I can't answer the question of what's outside. But I can still, nobody can tell me I can't have my imagination and think about what might be.
But after I die, if I go to heaven,
God willing.
that
Yeah,
means I'm conserved.
Yeah.
And that doesn't conflict physics law.
No, it
The
doesn't.
energy and mass is conserved.
No, it doesn't. No, it doesn't. Not
It's
at
in
all.
perfect coordinates.
Yeah. And so all I'm trying to make the point is that physics is not, yes, it can be mystical. Well, so can religion, for that matter. I mean, we have the holy mysteries. And one thing I forgot to mention is, why do we take communion? Well, we take communion because that's the particle form of Jesus Christ and body and blood. And then, of course, we pray, and then we go to church. That's the Holy Spirit that warms our soul. And so, you know what I mean? And that works with God. And so that's why the Trinity is so critical. That's why I never understood. I mean, I went to Sunday school, but I just never really understood the importance of a lot of this dogma until I started looking at it from a physics perspective. Yes?
And you know how you talked about that a leap of faith in believing that the laws of physics are universal,
Yeah.
and I take it that your beliefs on the Holy Trinity being explained in particles and waveforms, is that
A leap of faith? Oh, absolutely. First of all, again, I'm not a theologian, and God forgive me if I said anything wrong. All I'm trying to say is that physicists, what drives most physicists, why did I want to be a physicist? Because I always wanted to understand how things work. And so not realizing, I thought, okay, it's all based on particles. It's all based on energy. And, what you begin, as you get older, you mature, and then you start to see things a little differently. And then you realize there's actually more to it. Because I can't yet explain, why I'm here. But I can still use what I've learned to God, and it should be precious to us too. And that includes our fellow human beings. And that is, as Father Blasco said, that's the way of life. That's that when you come to that understanding, then you begin to say, that's the Christian way of life, of being in trying to be in God's glory and His grace, and doing what you think would be best to glorify Him. Yes.
According to evolution, there's been 4 major times when a lot of civilizations and animals were wiped out. Do you believe that God then restarted that?
Well, again, that's a very, very good question. And again, I grapple with these. I'm still grappling with some of these issues.
Right, like
Yeah. I mean, there was a recent study that they went back. They took the human DNA and they found out everything about 12,000. What was it? Or 120,000 years ago, there was some common ancestor. Okay. I believe, life. I believe in evolution, but again, it's not a finished theory. There's more to it.
And it would take forever to recreate all those animals.
Right.
Such a short
Right. The point is, God does things in His time. How He wants to create, remember, God is this infinite, I believe, entity. Okay. It's not like He's going to take a screwdriver and put things together. It's His way. Okay, I had a dream with my brother once, and we were discussing something. We were having a nice drive in a Corvette convertible or something, and he's like, "Well, Mike, is it about understanding, or do you want to make the world a better place?" And then I realized, you're right. It's not just about understanding. It's not who knows, the first fusion reaction like Max Born in the sun. It's about, can you use that knowledge for human benefit? And so. Sorry, I lost my train of thought, but so I mean, so that's kind of the. So when you talk about Lucy and stuff, I don't know how God. I'm not going to pretend to know how God created. Okay, God set the universe. He knew life was going to come out. When Adam and Eve, remember they were just dead robots until He breathed the Holy Spirit into them.
Do you think they looked?
And He gave us.
I think they did, yeah. I mean, I don't know, again, I'm not a theologian, and I'm certainly not an biologist,
And He gave us the brain and said
Right.
to use it,
Right.
bad or good.
The point is
Use it.
exactly. So, we experience the world through, everything in your brain is electrical. Okay, so everything we're experiencing, touch, sound, is being processed by this computer, this amazing quantum computer we call the brain. in that computer and outside of that computer, I believe there's a component that I call the soul. That is the thing that, when you have these instantaneous responses or that sixth sense, somebody's behind me. There's something there. Some people are more in tune with it than others. But it's there. It's there because my argument is we can imagine things far greater than this universe itself. That's a gift. That's God's gift. And so I really, it's interesting for me. What happened to Adam? What was the deal? And again, as a physicist, it's hard for me to comment because I'm not a theologian, but it certainly does. Science is not at odds with it. That's all I'm trying to say.
As a physicist, what do you think of the Shroud of Turin?
Of the what?
The Shroud of Turin.
Okay, that's I saw a show on that, and I actually, one of my professors at Caltech, Tom Tambrello, who was working on the accelerator, and I worked with him on that. He had a piece of the shroud. They were analyzing it for the carbon dating. Yeah, he's one of the scientists involved in that. First of all, there's a lot of questions. Apparently, it was stored in some castle or castles. There was a fire in the castle, and the problem is the carbon dating is kind of messed up. Okay, messed everything up. But I mean, certainly I believe Jesus resurrected. I mean that's faith. But boy, there was a lot of documented evidence of that. A lot of people said he was resurrected. Was there a shroud on him? Of course there was. That was Jewish tradition at the time. Is that the original one? I really don't know. It's like I hear something say it could be something.
What do you think about the energy that would take
to resurrect him?
Resurrect.
Sure.
So it would.
Sure. Absolutely. This world is except for the soul, I can break down all of our physical reality to particles and waves. And of course, particles, waves are energy. The particles are, the massive particles are stored energy. So it's all energy. Now, in the process of, of bringing Lazarus back and Jesus, of course, God can do whatever he wants. He's the master. It's his universe. We're just actors. We're not, I don't own anything. The more I go into this, the more I'm like, well, who am I? You know what I mean? And that's not a bad thing. You begin to understand the infinity of it's amazing.
It's like the Mandela.
Yeah.
The more you look at it, the more.
Yeah. And I'm not afraid to look at it. Like I always tell my kids, I would scare the ghosts because I'd have too many questions for them. Yes.
Yeah. It just seems to me that the concept of autonomous man versus man working in synergy with God is something that's crucial to this argument of who am I, what is the world, because the mystery lies in that we have to be in synergy with God in order to know who we are.
Yeah, I completely agree with you.
Yeah.
And again, I think that's where these concepts of Jesus washing the woman, her feet, we're all servants to each other. The idea, and again, from a physics perspective, it just makes sense. You want something to go, in synergy with God, and He has the right to do that because He made all of us. So yeah, the more I think about it, the more humble I actually become because I just there's such amazing beauty that I realize I'll never fathom, but I have infinity time to fathom it. You know what I mean?
Right. Yeah.
You can be slow, you can be whatever, but if you've got eternity, so what? You go on your own time, and but the point is to be with God. Are we going to be with God? Or are we going to be against God? That's the point. I think that's the essence of the human condition, and that's so. All I'm saying is that people are trying to say you can't be religious to be a scientist. I say false. Okay, I say completely false because they can't. Science cannot answer these questions that I'm trying to ask, and I've been asking ever since I was probably a little kid. I just, I chose this particular venue to try and answer that. Yeah.
In physics, I understand that waves can become particles, and particles they can change properties.
Yes, they can. Yeah.
How is that?
Well, let me give you an example. You can take a high energy gamma ray. Actually, two of them, and above a certain energy, 1.2 million electron volts, they will convert into an electron and a positive electron, a positron. So you have two pure energy photons converting it to charged particles. And that is a well-known, in fact, Carl Anderson, I think from Caltech, I think got the Nobel Prize for that in the 1930s, and for discovering the positrons. So that happens all the time. In fact, if you read the first 3 minutes from Steven Weinberg's book, he goes into this huge discussion of all these parts of the soup, this amazing cosmic soup of protons, of W bosons, of neutrinos, of photons, gamma rays that are in the soup. And then about after 700, I think he said it was 700,000 years, maybe 300 after at the first bang, then it cooled enough that then the light, as we know it, the visible light escaped. So it depends on how you want to look at it. When let there be light, you could say that was at the dawn of time with the Big Bang, or you could say the dawn of measurable, visible light. That would be the let there be light.
I've heard that photons can communicate with one another from one end of the universe
Yes.
in nanoseconds.
Well, even maybe instantaneously. And that's what I was talking about, the photon entanglement. That's a mystery that people were still trying to. I don't understand it. I mean, I can understand it from the standpoint of equations. I can show you. You have these wave functions. You split them. As long as you do nothing to break this connection, this information, then yes, it's as if they're entangled. And I think that all particles, in some bizarre way, are entangled.
I have an open question actually for anybody who can answer this.
Yeah.
I've been raised to believe that we basically are traced back to Adam and Eve. What children did Adam and Eve have? Because I kind of come up with the name Cain and Abel.
Yeah, right.
But Cain and Abel was a story of two sons.
Yes.
That's all they had was two sons.
Don't forget that.
That's not true.
I think you have daughters.
That's why I asked.
Yeah.
You know, the Bible doesn't say they didn't have other children. You know.
Well, why would the Bible not refer to any other children except for Cain and Abel?
Well, because they were, you know, the brothers who actually had, you know, one took one way, the other way. You know, it's showing us, you know, that you can be like Abel, you can be like Cain.
Don't forget that Adam and Eve were a special singular event. There are believed to be that there were kind of quasi-humans before that, but they didn't have a soul.
You know, but the Holy Fathers, they say, you know, not necessarily God. It doesn't say that God, He created them first, but it doesn't mean that He didn't create other people as well.
Okay.
Yeah, it's a Holy Spirit that they had the grace of God in them, and so then that kind of got spread out.
I can only speak from my own experience with being raised in a private Catholic school.
Mm-hmm.
And the thing for me is that, you know, they say that we were basically come from Adam and Eve, and there's no reference or mention that other human-like beings existed. It's implied
Mm-hmm.
that basically life as a human took place by the form of Adam and Eve.
Mm-hmm.
And the only thing that I recall, and I'm the first one to say I don't know my Bible very well, but the thing is,
Neither do I.
but even when I took religious classes,
Yeah.
but the only thing that I can recall was that there was Cain and Abel, and that's the name that keeps coming. That's why I double check with my wife.
Yeah.
It was just two sons, and I just don't recall any mention of any other children, a third son or fourth son, or any other daughters.
Yeah.
And it just, as a simple man, I question if there's two sons, how did we
Right.
essentially reproduce
No, I
in
understand.
the human form?
Right, and that's a very good question.
But you see the difference between East and West?
Yeah.
It was classic.
Yeah.
Because being a convert to Orthodox myself, I mean, you said, I was brought up that there was no mention, so therefore there isn't it.
I agree.
Father Blasco is saying, well, there's no mention of it.
That doesn't mean it's not there.
There's
Yeah, it wasn't written about. Don't forget, if it is 120,000 years ago, you know, people didn't write like, you know, they didn't have papyrus. They didn't, you know, it was more oral tradition, you know, and so it just depended. They focused on certain stories, and that's what they told.
Jesus' brothers were not necessarily full brothers. They were it's the same Greek word as what father, cousins.
Yeah. So I mean, there were other humanoid, or you know, but again, I don't know for sure. That's why I have to be careful when I talk about that. I'm just because I'm coming more from the physics perspective. But it is believed that, I mean, with every species there probably was something. It's just that, you know, some chicken or the egg. But then there are other within the species, or you know, that didn't have that gene or that gift, and then it got kind of spread around as they interbred with the other.
Appreciate your answer.
Yeah. I'm sorry, I
I
missed
think
this.
he was before me.
Okay. I'm sorry.
6 cents back here.
Yes. I'm sorry.
No problem.
Okay.
I've always wondered about the verse in Genesis that is, I think, right before the one you put up there.
Mm-hmm.
And the one where it says the world was out without form and void,
Mm-hmm.
and I think darkness across the waters.
Yeah.
Can you offer your thoughts or speculations about that?
Sure. I mean, again, the way from a physicist, the way everything in this world is dominated by something we call energy. Energy is what we call the ability to do work. So without energy, you basically have nothing. Now, the interesting thing, which I didn't really talk much about, but I implied it, was that it's called the quantum vacuum. Even though Einstein said that space-time is a void, it has nothingness, actually it's believed to have something, because you can go and from quantum electrodynamics, you can do an integral and you can show that like in 1 centimeter cubed of space-time, it may have infinite energy. What that actually means is we just don't understand. Okay, our theory's not quite. Whenever you integrate something, you get an infinite answer. We have to start from the drawing board again. Okay, but the point is that the way I see space-time is this bubble, this balloon that's expanding, that allows energy, because energy may be part of that bubble. You know how like when you have bubbles in a fish tank? Okay, I look at energy as kind of like that. It might just be bubbles of space-time. I don't know. That propagate at the speed of light. So you have this fish tank that's expanding. What it's expanding into may be nothingness. Okay, but the space-time itself actually is something. It's not just the void that Einstein would have us. And you know, it's kind of taboo. Physicists don't like to talk about that because then we'd have to say Einstein was wrong. I don't think he was completely wrong. I just think that we need to improve the theory. No theory of physics is exact. I'm sorry I don't want to burst anybody's bubble, literally. But no, it's an approximation. It's our imagination. Even the ancient Greeks realized that. They said if you have a table, a perfect table exists only in your mind. That's why I said the mind is the playground of the infinities. It doesn't exist in reality. It's going to have errors. It's going to, chips, whatever, deformations. So that's the kind of world we live in. And some people have argued that that was necessary so we could have free will. The uncertainty principle.
Isn't a prayer energy?
Yeah. A prayer? I think it is. Yes, I think when you pray, I think you're sending positive energy.
You pray.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, I want to talk about something else, but just quickly, in most Orthodox writings say that Adam, and I suppose Eve, was the most beautiful human being, and we are based on what God looked like, so I refuse to think that Adam looked like a monkey.
Oh, he did not look like a monkey.
Because I don't think God looks like a monkey.
No.
Yeah.
No, and you know,
he was the most perfect in every way.
Yes, and he blew it, and we're suffering the consequences.
Yeah.
But the point is that first of all, even Father Blasco pointed out to me that Charles Darwin came from a religious faith, and he said at the end of his treatise, and it's all because of God. I mean. Again, I am not going to tell God how to create, and I'm not going to pretend to imagine how He created us. I believe we're here. We were planned to be here. We were calculated. Yes, and, again, you could have the world as it was, and then Adam happened to be, put into that world. I mean, do you know what I mean? But he did not look like a monkey. No, not at all. And there was just the argument that some of our DNA may have a common ancestor, based on this idea of evolution. That's all.
Yeah. But I loved I was really delighted when I saw your example. I know it's kind of a funny thing, like an icebreaker about wine and time.
Yes.
Because I was actually just thinking about it these couple of weeks. First I was thinking why first God said I will resurrect, but then for 3 days nobody knew anything. They had to wait for 3 full days. That was a lot, Mm-hmm. He was their God, It's like, why did you make us wait for 3 days? And then after that he says, oh, come back again. Then they wait for 40 more days. They're waiting. They don't know. Everybody's freaked out, getting together in Jerusalem, where is he? And then he shows up, and then 10 more days till Holy Spirit comes, all the time, and I'm like, oh, he really made everybody wait, you know. And then I was reading, I believe it's The Life of Virgin Mary. It's those books which are not from the Bible, but in the Bible, but they're pretty good, apocrypha and everything. I'm not sure. So I go back and read because I don't have such a good memory, but basically it kind of goes more into detail when he was in the turning water into wine in Cana. So when the wine was running low, I guess his mom was fussing. He's like, come on, there's no more wine. What are we gonna do? And and so he told his mom. He looked at her and he's like, well, don't you think that like for him for me there's no time. Don't you think I knew that this was going to happen maybe years ago? This thing, and that the wine is going to run out. So there's a point in this wine running out. And the point is in order, that people would learn that there's an order with God. So the big word is order, because it kind of connects with everything.
It totally connects, yeah. Let me just comment on that. That's an excellent point you bring up, okay? Again, God, he's on a totally different time scale than we are. And imagine this entity that is doing everything, okay? Splitting the wave function, he's here, he's there. I'm just impressed. I mean, all I can do is think in awe. But one of the key things that you learn about life, and this also I think about when I think about my sister and I try and understand what happened to her, God's will is absolute. God is always really in control. We think we're in control, but we're not really, okay? And God, patience is a virtue. That's a big concept, patience. That God wants us to be ready. He wants us to be resonant with His quantum wave function, His love, but He wants us to get there. Just like any father, I am a father, I love my kids more than anything, but you realize if you give them too much too soon, they get spoiled. And so they have to struggle. And I think the essence of being a Christian and the essence of being a human being is to struggle. In that process of struggling, that's where you come to this understanding, this humility. And you're with God. Then you're with God. Now you understand, okay, that you're you're a servant of God. And I love that. I love that when people die and they say servant of God, Christina or whatever, because it's a deep concept and it's not a bad thing. It's just that we will never be God. God is God. Okay, are we going to be with Him or against Him? That's the question. He can't. He doesn't want against. He wants love, because that's the most powerful force. That love comes through patience. When you wait, then you start to think, you ruminate, and then it starts to come. Then it becomes, and that's why when you look at, the saints, and they're always praying, they're always thinking, they're in reflection. They don't know all the answers, but then sometimes the Holy Spirit helps them out a little bit. Yeah. That's what I. Yeah.
I found, is it okay to argue that, in essence, with that, we're creating atheism within our science classes?
Well, that's a very good question.
What's the question?
If we separate science from religion, the question is that sort of encouraging atheism? It is encouraging atheism, that's true. But there are scientists that are trying to explain that you don't have to be, believing in science, which, is just understanding science, basically, does not make you necessarily an atheist. And what bothers me is that in our society, they're trying to force this conflict where there really should be no conflict. I remember taking a course at Caltech, it was called Protestant, Catholic, and Jew, and we read books like the Armada, and looked at the context of the various religious movements, but it was a religious course, okay, and a philosophy course. And then we have quantum mechanics or quantum field theory. It is what it is. When I test my students, either you know how to integrate this function or you don't. And you know what I mean? Maybe I'll give you some partial credit, maybe I won't. But the problem is when you force, what I'm saying is that science is just science for science sake. It's empirical. It's about observing. Metaphysics or religion transcends that, and so I can't force those two to be together. But I can say, to me, that they mutually inspire, they mutually complement they're not equal. They're not the same thing. I cannot prove God in the confines of four-dimensional space-time. I can say I have faith. I can say what I see in the way the amazing, miraculous, aspects of life and the universe and everything that happened portend, suggest a God, but I can't prove. Because remember, I said God can be inside and outside His creation. How can I prove something that can go outside of the creation? I can't, from a logical standpoint. So what I'm saying is the sad thing, and especially now it's important for people to learn science because we're getting a lot of problems because of, our overuse of knowledge, because of, genetically modified foods, because of the poisoning of our atmosphere. And so what's sad is we should be diverting our resources to fighting these issues and not this, what's religion, what's science. Science is science. It's very easy. I can show you a textbook. I can show you the equations. But I cannot say creationism in that textbook because I can't prove creationism. But I can show evidence of it. I can show evidence of, I wouldn't say, well, okay, evolution in the sense of changing of genotypes. People in college biology courses they'll do experiments with fruit flies, and you can show how genes. And isn't it ironic? Mendel was a monk, and he's the one that was the father of modern genetics. He was a monk. Okay, he wasn't necessarily. We can't be afraid of knowledge for knowledge's sake, but at the same time, the problem religion is something I cannot prove, and so that's why they should be separate.
I felt like from my experiences that science classes were teaching me the religion of atheism, if I may go there.
No, you may, absolutely. And my students ask me those kinds of questions, and when I and again I have to be careful, as a professor, but I will often couch my arguments in saying, if you believe the universe came about by accident or it was created, and I give them that option. I'm not going to tell you. You believe what you want, and then of course many of them will come after my class and they will, Doc, what do you believe? I believe the universe was created. That's all. But it's not. Science is being misunderstood if you're seeing it as just as an outlet for atheism. It's not. It's being used as a crutch for atheism. That's the problem.
Yeah, but I feel like as scientist, maybe it's just my experience. I felt so alone in the science field, and I think atheist physicists are probably the most difficult that I've ever come across.
That's really interesting. I'm sorry to hear you say that. No, because I've had arguments with atheists, and the problem is they get angry, and because I believe in Santa Claus, and I'm supposed to say, even though there was a Saint Nicholas, but that's another story, who did do miracles. But the point is that, again, I think the problem is that when you're afraid to speak out, then you get into this mantra that, well, I'm a scientist, therefore I have to be an atheist. And that's what I'm fighting with this kind of talk.
Well, and it can be a two-way street, because a lot of times you'll have students come in and say they're expecting their education to be anti-religious because they've been told, oh, when you go to college, the professors there will convince you not to believe in God. And so there's that kind of defense mechanism up there.
Yeah, I want to speak. I'm a professor, and my field is cognitive science. And I think, first of all, and of course I'm an Orthodox Christian, and I think the most important thing, Christians should never be afraid of the truth. This is very easy for me as a scientist to go and measure things that if I told my students, no, that's not true, those are not true, then I'm creating atheists, frankly, because what I'm saying is ridiculous. I can't convince any student that what I'm saying is true if I say, oh, you need to, it's literally 7 days and this and that, because it's clearly not true. There's so many questions. You didn't even begin to touch on, like, for example, how do we experience consciousness?
Yeah.
And there's the materialist explanation. Oh, it's just these,
neurons firing, chemical neurotransmitters,
something, and then you're conscious. Okay, so it relates to your point. If we can imagine it, we don't have any imagination of how you could solve that problem. That's the body-mind problem. How it's really the problem of, does God exist? Do we exist? Are we different? So I don't think we should avoid those questions. And I don't think your professors are necessarily, just because they're saying, well, this is the way it is, that they're saying, no, you shouldn't believe in God, and there's not a God, involved in any of this or in any way.
It was funny, when I was in college, the Christians were the ones who were actually in sciences. Without a doubt.
That's great. Yeah.
All the atheists were like, the professor's philosophy.
Yeah.
They were deconstructing.
It was my
and-
quantum
and,
mechanics professor who was
English or
Christian.
something.
Yeah.
My calculus professors were all three of them were Christian.
Cool. Yeah.
I mean, it was like, it was really funny, and we would have they actually had we had the best talks with them.
Yeah.
They were so real.
You know what? This universe would be so lonely without God. I want to just say that we are so, when you think about the depths of nothingness, that we exist, and yet we can have dreams greater than this universe. That is just, I'm sorry, I cannot explain that in this physical world. And, you know, of all the scientists, I read this somewhere, I can't remember, the most religious are physicists. So I'm sorry you had a negative experience. I'm telling you, of all the scientists, physicists are the most religious. That's my last one.
Well, as you said, it would be so scary to imagine that we are alone in this world. Very scary. Disappointing.
That would be very disappointing. And you know what? Even if it were true, I would rather still have the love of God in my heart and do something positive to help my fellow human beings than live in some stinky, deserted castle with all the gold and you know what I mean in the world, and then just die. I would rather have God with me. You know what I mean? Even if He didn't exist, and I know He exists, but that's how I look at it. Otherwise, we're dreaming. It's as if we never existed. If there's no God, then it's as if we were never here. Because you know what? We're all going to die, and then we're going to go away, and this universe is going to end up fizzling out, and it's as if we never existed. So you know what? It's better to believe in something than nothing.
Just really quickly about these wormholes. Is that time travel?
Yeah, that's one aspect. Yeah, I will never forget when I was visiting different graduate schools. That'll be the last thing I'll say. I was visiting grad schools, and I was at the University of Chicago, and when I was finished Caltech. And there was Kip Thorne. There was a film that came out recently that he did. I forgot the name of this. That's the one, yeah. So he was one of the main guys, and he was a really cool, I took general relativity from him, and I loved him as a professor. So he's with this famous Nobel laureate, Chandrasekhar, and who was a professor at Chicago, and they're having this debate. The chalk has gone flying off, and then, no, it's got to be this way. And I realized they were talking about these wormholes. And sure enough, a month later, there was this article in Physical Review Letters, where Kip Thorne had published about the possibility of time travel via these mini baby black holes. The problem with conventional black holes is that they crush everything to a singularity. So the idea is if you would go into it, you'd be crushed and then you'd be dead. But the idea is, could you go through like these little quantum black holes and not be crushed and then go into another universe or go into another? Yeah, so it is related to time travel. Okay.
I just can't figure out what I was going to say, but I think something you said reminded me of a quote that C.S. Lewis said. I think it was in Mere Christianity, but he said, if the universe had no meaning, then we should never have known that it has no meaning, just as if
I love that.
If there were no light, and therefore no creatures with eyes. So
right, that we can't see. Why should we be able to see? I agree.
He was an academic. Don't forget.
Yeah, he was an academic, by the way. C.S. Lewis was professor of was English or literature. And literature. So the point is again that my argument is if I can imagine, why can't it be true? Otherwise, why am I allowed to imagine?
I completely agree with everything you said. I think
Could that be the black hole?
Wait, she's saying something.
I think what I was trying to argue is that, like, with a few Orthodox Christian scientists, and I will focus it on just Orthodox Christian scientists out there.
I'm Orthodox Christian too, so I'm trying to be respectful to other religions, but
yeah. So I think it's really important that we don't, or from my experience, because the Christian professors that have had amazing scientists, very successful geniuses, they will never mention religion, but the atheist ones, they will shove it down your throat.
That's true.
And if you don't know it,
that's
or
true.
if you don't want it, you're on the losing end, and you
No,
are
yeah.
persecuted in these classes.
That's true. First of all, there's a famous quote from Jesus: "You will be persecuted for your faith." Okay, so, again, as I said, part of the living is struggling, and unfortunately, we live in a world where people are actively trying to destroy Christianity, and we need to fight that. And so that's why all I'm trying to make with this talk is that nobody can tell me that I can't be a physicist because I believe in God.
So how do we strengthen that core scientist group?
Well, you know, I mean, that's a very good point. I think, see, like, let me give you an example. If you noticed on some of the, what I had mentioned, I wrote all these pieces. Most of them were published in Pravda, in Russia, okay? Yeah. They weren't published here. That doesn't mean I didn't try to get them published here, okay? So we got a lot of censorship going on in our so-called free and fair media. And how do we fight that? Look at what Russia Today did. They've been successfully countering a lot of the Western propaganda about the Ukraine, and so much so that they were deemed that there was some head of some British media group that kind of
responsibility as well. So you got to shut. You know, there are a lot more religious people on any college campus than you may be aware of.
That's true.
It's just if you're working, particularly in a secular state, if you work for a public university, you respect the rules, right? If other people aren't respecting the rules, but you got to shut down the conversation. It's more from the other end, I feel like, it's creating this.
That's true. Yeah, I mean, Christians have always been tolerant and, you know, look, live and let live. I mean, God does not want you to be forced into your faith. You have to want to be with God. And so the point is that it's this aggressive, anti-Christian actions. Every Christian I've known has been mostly very gentle. You know, I mean, we can discuss, we can debate, but we're going to love each other. You know, we're all God's creation, whether you're Jewish or Protestant or Catholic or whatever. But the point is, it's this militancy that's trying to destroy Christianity. That's what I worry about. And that's why, yeah, we need to speak out. I mean, we need to be, come up with, you know, our own, you know, magazines or, you know, literature, you know.
I was reading an article, and I know it's a couple of years old when I got to it, and they were talking about how quantum mechanics actually had to go to Russian Orthodoxy to start explaining some of these things. Is that, could you explain, like, that was a little over my head.
Okay, well, okay, first of all, there's a, and I've never